Thank you for tuning into the Monocle Dynasty podcast, where we keep an eye on Dynasty football. Your hosts dive deep on players, rankings, strategies, and much more. Make sure to follow us on Twitter at Monocle Dynasty. And now, here's your host. Welcome back to the Monocle, where we keep an eye on Dynasty football. I am your host, Dynasty Coach A, and I am joined by a good friend of mine, Kevin Coleman, at DuBois_22. From one of the co-hosts of the Devy Royale, and also a recently joined member of the footballguys.com. So how's it going, Kevin?
Hey, man, I'm good, man. We're ready to talk a little Dynasty right after the Combine, right? So that just happened, and I think this is an exciting time to be in some Dynasty leagues. So I appreciate you guys having me on.
Absolutely, and like you said, this is a lot of fun. This is kind of the best time, especially if you really know what you're doing and you know the Devy players, you know the rookies, and it's so much fun because you see everything that's going on with the Combine, and it's just a very exciting time. That's why I wanted to bring Kevin on so that we can sit here and kind of bullshit about the players here and see what happened, because I mean everyone's freaking out after the Combine. Everyone ran a 4.22. It was crazy, and here we are. So what'd you think of the Combine? Did it blow your mind?
I try to keep a level head about the Combine. I think that it can serve a purpose. Like there's things that you like to see, like and relative athletic score. I think that's one thing I was going to mention anyway. But like just seeing what's these guys' athleticism? How do they look? And I know it can be kind of hit or miss with some of these guys, but it's fun to watch. Like you watching Jordan Davis run a 4.840 at 300 something pounds. You're just like, this man is a monster. And then you're looking at something like Kyron Williams. You're like, man, what happened to him this fast? So like, it's interesting to see how like fast and dramatic these things can shift. And then like anything, I love being on Twitter when these things happen, because just like in games, like I like watching the instant reactions. It's a lot of fun.
Oh yeah, that's the best. I mean, the Kyron Williams stuff. And I mean, don't get me wrong, like I liked Williams. Not like some people were going crazy putting him up at like 1 and 2 and stuff like that. Like I liked him. I liked him as a friend, but but after he ran 4.72, it was like, nah, not so much. But it's one of those things where it could end up being a good thing, because I still think he's a decent player, and you might be able to get him as a value later on. But if the NFL's just like, nah, this guy ain't it, then maybe not. We'll have to wait and see.
It really comes down to that, right? Like I liked him too, kind of. Like he was one of those guys I liked last year as far as Devy goes, but I always kind of was concerned about the size. After what I saw what they did with Kenneth Gainwell, I realistically kind of shifted my expectations with Kyron. If I had him in Devy, I moved him. If I had him in C2C, if I was contending, I kept him. But I definitely take into account what these guys think of guys like Kyron Williams and stuff. And I think Kenneth and all these guys, sometimes we outsmart ourselves trying to find that next guy. If it's under 200 pounds, bro, I'm out. Like I'm just out. Like it just doesn't make any sense to me. And I might miss 1 or 2, but you're if you keep 9 of those guys, you're gonna miss 8 of the times. Like it's just one of those things where I've shifted my focus with running backs, and you got to hit a certain number for me, or you're just not draftable.
Yeah, and you're probably better off, like you said. I mean, yeah, you're gonna miss one here or there. And every once in a while, you're gonna have your Austin Eckler's, and so I mean, even though he's over 200, but I mean, right there, right at the cusp. But it's like you're gonna miss those guys, but at the same time, you're probably gonna get a lot more hits if you just say, hey, give me like a 30 BMI or whatever it is. But I like to jump ahead of myself here. I really wanted to ask you, before we got into all the Combine talk and everything, like how did you feel about this class? Because everyone has a different opinion. You have some people on either side of the coin saying, it's the worst class they've ever seen. Other people saying, they love these receivers or whatever it might be. Where did you fall before the Combine, and did anything change after that?
In my opinion, it was always real. My realistic outlook of this was lukewarm, and it was one of those things where I like Garrett Wilson. He's one of my favorite receivers in the class. I liked Breece Hall, and that was really like when I was looking at the class as a whole. I still like Isaiah Spiller. I know that some people kind of are nervous about him, what his athletic testing is going to be, and I understand the concerns there. But like to me, it was those 3 guys, and then Burks came on, and I'm probably lower on Burks than most, just because I'm just nervous about his profile, his lack of route running, his kind of ability in that Arkansas offense, which doesn't necessarily mean it's his fault, but there are some things that I question about that offense that he's playing in. So like for me, I was always like, hey, if you could move a 105, or if you can kind of go in that area and you can kind of play around with it, then go do it. And even now, I think I always said too, it's going to be based on draft capital with the quarterbacks. So before, I mean, we did a Debbie Royale 4-round mock before any of this stuff came out. We did like, I think in January, February. And we did like, we had no quarterbacks in the first 5 picks because we said, hey, we don't know what these quarterbacks are going to be. And Superflex even until we see the draft capital. And I still don't think we know what these guys' draft capital. I think Willis is for sure going to be in the round 1. And then after that, there's a lot of question marks. Desmond Ridder now, right? Like he's getting talked up. So like for me, it was lukewarm. But I said, hey, if draft capital can push some of these guys down, like if you can get Garrett Wilson at the 107, that's a steal because he's the wide receiver 1 to me. So I think it's okay. But I was moving a lot of picks. I don't have a lot of 22 first anymore because I moved them a couple like last year. So I was just realistic at what was out there.
Yeah. Now, I do think, like you said, I mean, it's not the most exciting class in the world or anything like that. It's definitely not the 2017 class or the 2020 class or whatever. But at the same time, like I feel like, especially with the way Brees ran at the combine, which I don't freak out about the combine either, except for running backs. You know, like it does matter for running backs, and especially like you said, it also matters for their draft capital. You know, when they blaze at the 40 or in the 40, then a lot of times they'll get first round capital or like early second round capital or whatever it may be. So, you know, I think he was going right around like pick number 50 on NFL draft mock database. And now, I mean, I could see him getting up into like the 40s or possibly even a little bit ahead of that. You know, I don't think it would be that crazy. So that's going to make a big difference for Brees. And I think that's exciting. You know, when you get that like one stud running back that everyone wants, I think we're getting closer to that point, even though, you know, even a couple weeks ago, it was more like, oh, it's a toss up. It could be Spiller. It could be Burke, you know, it could be Hall, you know, it could be Walker or whoever. And like now I feel like we have at least the one where people can get really excited about having that 101. And that makes a big difference in the class because now you have a reason to go trade or try to trade back or do whatever, and that makes a huge difference in rookie drafts.
And it does, right? And then so now you're looking at, I think he was up to, running back 6 or 7 in some people's rankings already, and he hasn't even played it down yet. We don't even know where he's at. So like when you're looking at perceived value, like that's good. I mean, I know that you had mentioned, I know you've been around, like you've been grabbing 2022 first before the combine, and I've seen it. And if value, you know, predicated that, then I say go for it, right? Like I'm never one of those guys that says, no, you can't do it. I mean, you have to go with the market. And like right now, the market now has shifted to where you might be able to get more talent. So like, I see that. I think Brees had he's a phenomenal athlete. So he had a great day. I mean, I still don't think anybody's going to get drafted in the first round for running back. I don't see that happening. I really don't. But you know, realistically though, he's going to be in there. So you're going to have him up there. If you have him in the top 8, top 7, top 6, it's with the running back situation, how it is in the NFL. I don't hate it. It just depends on where he goes.
Our boy Alex Duchesne says RB4 baby.
Yeah, he's a truther. If you look up truther, Duchesne is in there as a Brees Hall truther. But you got to respect it. I mean, he's put himself out there.
I will give him a little credit because we just had a startup and he took Brees very early. I think it was like maybe it was RB4. It was very early and. You know, it looked really crazy at the time. And then he goes and runs that in the 40. And, you know, like I said, his draft capital is probably going to creep up. And all of a sudden, it doesn't look that crazy. Like, it's still a little crazy. It's Duchesne's. I mean, it wouldn't be crazy if it wasn't. But, you know, it's not as crazy now.
I mean, and it's one of those things, too. Like, when you go get your guys, it's okay. Like, I was a big Jamar Chase guy last year. And I grabbed him in every startup I could. I mean, I grabbed him like the 6th round of a startup. Remember when he was going through all like the balls dropping stuff and all that kind of stuff? Yeah. He fell to like the 6th or 7th round. I got him on a team and I won the championship this year with him. And I had him in the 6th or 7th round. So like, I think it's just sticking to your guns. Like for me, Garrett Wilson, you know, I drafted him pretty early this year in a startup, I think 5th round. I think the end of the 5th, start of the 6th. And he was the, you know, rookie wide receiver 2 off the board for me, but he was someone that I'm going to go get. I'm going to go grab. I mean, Brees Hall just went in the 6th round before the combine in a startup that we're doing. He went in the 6th round, which I think is a tremendous value now based on what he just did.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, I'm right there with you with Garrett Wilson. You know, like dude is a stud. He, you know, like I'm not going to make any arguments with anyone that has him above Burks. And you know, like they're, as far as I'm concerned, they're basically in the same tier. Yeah. I mean, they're very close. I get your concerns with the route running and everything, and you know, everyone has. I guess if you were to say like, I haven't heard anyone really have like concerns with Garrett Wilson. It's really more concerns with Burks. And, maybe it gets nitpicky, and that's why, because he was the clear-cut wide receiver one for most people, and so people start nitpicking like they did with Saquon and like they did with JT and whoever else, it's so easy. And Jamar Chase, he can't catch and all this other stuff. And I feel like it does get a little nitpicky, but at the same time, people like yourself that watch the film, they see the route running's not quite there and everything. So I can see either one being in that tier one. After that, it does drop off a little bit for me, but definitely I'm a big Garrett Wilson fan, especially after the combine. But does it? I mean, I guess I should ask, like, how much does the combine matter to you? And I know we've touched on it a little bit, but like, what about the combine would matter for you?
So for me, like when I'm watching it and they're like, the biggest thing is like, don't destroy your draft capital. Like, don't destroy it. Like Kyren Williams, he destroyed his draft capital, right? Like, he's got to have a good pro day. But going 4.65 and a 40 when everybody else is running like 4.3s, 4.4s, like 4.5, you can't do that, because now you're destroying that. Because if he goes to day 3, he's definitely out for me, right? But you look on the flip side, like Kenneth Walker, he had a really good combine, 4.38 and a 40, 34-inch vertical. So like, in my opinion, when I'm watching, it's just like, hey, do they do what if they look athletic, they hit that baseline 4.4, 4.5. And again, I know 4.6 isn't that slow. Like, so if Isaiah Spiller ran a 4.62, which I think Isaiah Spiller is going to be around 4.58, 4.62 in that area. If he runs that at his size, that's okay. Kyron's small. He's 5'9", 194. If he's running a 4.65 at that, I think you put things in perspective based on their measurements. And I think that's the key. Like, you look at Burks. You just mentioned Burks. We talked about him. I mean, I think if you felt Burks didn't do that good in the combine, it's because you came in with unrealistic expectations of the athlete that I think he was. Like, he's a good athlete, but people were saying like late 4.3s, 4.4s.
Yeah.
That was probably never going to happen. And we talked about it on the WRL. Like, we all said he's going to be a 4.5 guy. So like, we came in with this understanding of like who we thought Burks was as a prospect. Then he lost a couple inches, right? He's 6'2" instead of whatever he was. So like, when you're looking at his perspective of that, I think it's all based on like the prospect you think coming in, like, okay, this is what I expect from him, and then that can shift your value a little bit. But if you come in with a pretty open mind of like, hey, this is where I'm pretty sure his base is at, and as long as they hit around that, I'm okay with it.
And I believe you're more like film approach and everything, but do you get into like the nerdy stuff, like weight adjusted speed score, height adjusted speed score, stuff like that?
I get into obviously film is something I love to do. So like, I tell people all the time, I'm in this space because I like to do things, and I love film. I like watching it. So like, that's kind of where I tend to go, but I do respect analytics in that. I don't get as nerdy as like probably you do or other people do, but I do look for the main, like, relative athletic score, but like, hey, give me weighted dominator, give me early breakout age, give me like the little things. Jarek Backus does a really good job of this, like for Campus to Can. And I use a lot of his profile stuff as analytical tools for like college side, just to see, okay, what do I need to look for breakout? And then I look at that. But I do think that narrative matters, but I also I struggle with analytics sometimes in this perspective. Like right now I saw something about like Garrett Wilson, and they're talking about like, I did see this. I think, David Bell, a lot of people were on David Bell before the combine. They liked his numbers. They liked everything about it. And they said, well, look at Garrett Wilson. He got outproduced by Jackson Smith-Njigba. How good can he really be? Well, let's put into factor that Jackson Smith-Njigba is really good. Like, he is probably my wide receiver one for next year. Him getting outproduced is okay. David Bell should have done what he did. Who's on Purdue? Nobody's on Purdue. Like, that's just when you're looking at that. So like, I have question marks with that. I do have question marks all the time when I see like analytics guys say, well, draft capital is huge in my projections and stuff. Well, if it is, then I mean, I just struggle with that. Like, it's like, okay, well, so is it for my film projections too? Like, obviously draft capital matters, whatever there. So I question that, but there are little things I like. I do like the way I love early breakout age. I really look at that. But then again, you have to be careful with that, because like Jameson Williams, he didn't the first 2 years at Ohio State breakout because he was playing behind all of these dudes we're talking about, and he couldn't do it. And maybe that was, and it has more to do with just talent. Maybe it was other stuff. He goes to Alabama and crushes it. So do we knock Jameson Williams because those first 2 years? Or so that's, I think, my question for analytics as a whole.
You know what? I completely agree with you, and I am the analytics guy, but yet I've kind of like, I even said, joked around like a week ago, I said I was renouncing analytics because those people get wild, man. Like, I hate the way that a lot of analytics, more based analysts go off of like one metric or like
Yeah.
one particular thing. Like it's all breakout age, or it's all yards per team pass attempt, or it's all this. And I'm the big proponent of like you need more than one metric. You need a lot. I mean, my wide receiver model has like 17 different metrics. Actually, I think it's 23. Like there's a lot of stuff going into that. If I was using one, then you're gonna miss on you're gonna miss on like a Jalen Waddle. You're gonna miss on a Jameson Williams. Like, and I don't know why I'm only naming Alabama receivers, but those are the two that are coming to mind right now.
Yeah.
So I'm right there with you, but I was asking about the weight adjusted speed score because it's kind of what you were talking about, where Kyron Williams is smaller and slower than we expected him to be, and then you have Kenneth Walker, who's a little bit bigger, or I'm sorry, he's shorter, weighs a little bit more, and is a little faster than we thought, and so his weight adjusted speed score is actually going to be higher. So he ended up being a better athlete than we thought, and whereas Kyron is not.
Yeah, and I think everything. I swear, I just try. I will say, I think sometimes with analytics, when I'm looking at analytics, sometimes they can just come. I think that they get negatively affected by people too. Like people make fun of it because people don't understand it. So I understand where they come from. Like they're not trying to be combative. They want to prove why they're right because they have math mind, right? Like most analytic people, and I understand that. As a history teacher, I don't have that type of mind, but I know my math friends and my science friends, like this is right or wrong, and this is how they say it. And so like I try to look at it from that because I teach psych, so I do have this kind of mindset of like I understand what they're trying to do, but they can do a better job of getting their point across to embrace analytics. And I think that's the key. I agree. I think it has a place, just like everything has a place in it. Like there's a place for everything there, but also sometimes I just like watching film and saying, hey, this guy can play, and like this kid's really good at what he does. That's why I had Waddle as my wide receiver too last year. So, I took some heat for it a little bit, but I loved his tape. I loved how fast I knew he could do what he did. He got injured and he got docked for not having production. I'm like, well, he got injured. I mean, there's a realistic expectation. Waddle could have been a Heisman winner last year had he not gotten injured. He could have been Devonta Smith, and then we're having a whole different narrative.
Absolutely. Speaking of somebody that got injured, Toronto Dave over here is asking, or he's saying, Drake London is greater than everyone else, you schmucks. And I've heard that. It's not just Toronto Dave here, even though he's a great fan of the show and he always comments, so we appreciate that. But there's a lot of Drake London love. And it's kind of similar to what you're talking about with Jalen Waddle. Like, he got hurt when the dude was blowing up this year, and then he gets hurt. So, where does London fall for you? And like, are you kind of giving him that same love that you were giving to Waddle?
So I will say this, like Christian Williams, who I do the show with, he's the wide receiver one right now in terms of fantasy. Like that he has him there, and he just says his model because he does a lot of model. He does film and stuff, but he weighs it in analytics too. And for me, I like him, London. I do think that I get worried based on his profile, right? So we're looking at a guy, big catch radius. I worry about him being able to play on the outside. I think he's a slot receiver in a big frame, and I question kind of how is he going to line up on the outside? Can he do it? I think he might. To me, he's like one of those landing spot guys, and I'm saying, okay, where does he go? I mocked him to the Eagles, which I think is a good fit for the Eagles. I don't necessarily know if that's a good fit for fantasy managers because you have Hurts there. I don't know if you're a Hurts truther or not, but I think with him, Smith, and London, it could be a challenging thing because I don't know if he gets the targets, right? So I do think he made Keaton Slovis look good, which is an amazing thing to do because Keaton Slovis is not good at football. I just question, okay, where he's going to be. I think he's going to be going in the top 20, though. If he goes in the top 20, give me the draft capital, then I can live with it. I don't hate London, okay? I don't hate London. I am just lukewarm about those guys in terms of, like, draft. Just some of those guys, like, with profile, I'm missing. That's what I was talking about earlier. So, like, I talk about on the Debbie stuff all the time. I have kind of my misnomers like, hey, if this prospect hits this, I'm not drafting him. Like, there's just no way. I'm out on Kyren. There's guys like that I just don't go after. Brian Edwards was like that to me. Like, there's certain prospects I just don't have any shares because they hit these metrics. London's one of those guys that's like very, very close. Like, he's one of those guys where it depends on kind of the draft capital he gets. I might do it, but instead I tend to miss on guys like that because I just don't draft them.
Well, I think for me, like I said, having him above Burks and Wilson is just a little crazy to me. Obviously it sounds like you're not the biggest Burks fan, so maybe it wouldn't be that crazy for him, but definitely with Wilson. But it's just like, but he did. I mean, he like I said, he blew up this year.
Yeah.
He really did, and I mean, rightfully so. He had no competition. Now he also had a terrible quarterback, like you said. But it's one of those things where it's tough. You don't want to knock the guy for doing it when he was supposed to and everything, but he didn't really do it before that. So it's it is a little tough. But now do you? I think he didn't run at the combine, right? He didn't do any of the drills or.
No, I don't. No, he's not there yet. I think he's going to do his.
Was that because of the injury, or
Yeah.
do you think that was because he's worried about his athleticism, or?
I think he looked at it like, hey, I can use my injury as kind of like, I don't want to say excuse, but I think that he looked at it and said, I might as well just wait till April. I think he's going to run April 5th. It gives him another month. He could say, hey, the injury's there. I'll run it in my pro day. I think he's going to have a private pro day, a personal day for him. So I think that was a good business decision, right? Because if he goes off in front of those teams, I think it helps him. If he messes up at the combine, then you have a month to wait. I think that could be there. So I think it's that. Now, I went back just to chat. Right now, I have London as my wide receiver 3. So I don't hate him. I think that this is pre-draft rankings, but I still
Sure.
I like him.
But it's a teardrop. I mean,
Yes.
at least that's what it feels like to me.
It's a teardrop, but I have Traylon Burks as my wide receiver 4, so you're going to yell at me there. So I do. I actually have Jameson and Garrett as my wide receiver 1 and 2.
Ooh, I mean, don't get me wrong. I actually love Jameson Williams. I guess I dropped him down a little bit just because of the injury and everything. But I mean, he's still being projected to get like top 20 draft capital and everything. So it's really hard to drop him down too low. But I want to say I have him. Toronto says it's a teardrop from Kevin and John. Damn. Oh, that hurts. But yeah, so I do love me some Jameson. I get it. Like the dude's exciting. But I also think, like you said, that's where I don't look at like one thing. I don't look at, oh, he didn't produce until he's 21 years old and stuff like that. Like I look at the whole prospect. I love Jameson Williams. I mean, that dude is exciting. I was so mad when he got hurt in that game. Well, obviously, I mean, I guess Jameson Williams can't really be a riser for you because he didn't hardly do anything except for, I mean, he like weighed in. I guess he was a little lighter than maybe people thought he was going to be. But like decent size, nothing terrible. He's not Devontae Smith or anything like that. He's not Tutu Atwell, but who, if anyone, like were risers for you after the combine?
Yeah, I got a few. I think Desmond Ridder is a riser for me, just based on what he did. When 4.52 in the 40-yard dash, 36-inch vertical. His cone drill was awesome. 10-inch hands, right? Kenny Pickett could never. But when I look at kind of what he did as a quarterback, I mean, he looks okay throwing. I think with that showing, Ridder put himself in first round category. Like I think that someone may fall in love with the tools, and then you're looking at it from now, just from a strictly fantasy perspective. If him and Willis go in the first round, it's going to be hard for me not to have them as my QB 1 and 2, just based on upside and based on kind of the Konami stuff, based on the rushing upside. Like it would be hard for me not to have those two guys in there. So I think Ridder did a good job of what he was able to do. He showed his athleticism in there. If he can work on his mechanics, get his accuracy figured out, obviously coaching comes into play. But I think he did a tremendous job jumping up boards. If he gets to the first round, it's gonna be hard to be like, yeah, he's not my QB2 fantasy just based on his tools.
I mean, they both definitely have the exciting, rushing factor and everything. Like you said, I mean, I think maybe it should have been expected, but he kind of wowed at the combine. Everyone was freaking out about his athleticism. So, I get, the upside and everything. I definitely have a different opinion on Willis and Ridder as far as, like talent wise, like obviously they have the rushing abilities, but can they put it all together? And I know everyone wants everyone to be Josh Allen, but that doesn't happen very often. So I just, I just want people to pump the brakes. I'm not putting them at 101 and 102 just because they ran fast at the combine.
I mean, I think that's fair. I just, when I look at it, so if I say that he's QB2, everybody out there listening, it doesn't mean I would draft him. Like, I just look at perceived value. So, like, if he's QB2 in fantasy terms, I think people are going to have his value jump up. Now, I'm still drafting Garrett Wilson, so you all can kiss my ass. I'm going to take Garrett Wilson, but based on there, it's just one of those things because like if you look at the quarterbacks right now, Hal had a bad combine. Hal has not looked good. Corral hasn't thrown. Kenny Pickett, the hands really matter. Like that thing that does matter. Hand size. I know everybody laughs about it. Carson Strong's knee. I mean, there's question marks there. So like this is not a great class of quarterbacks, but I think Ritter did okay. I do think I'm like you though. I've not been a Willis truther just because I said, hey, he's got to work on his accuracy. The tools are there. And he's also going to be 23. He's an older prospect because he was in college for a long time. There's a reason why he left Auburn. There's a lot of little things that you got to understand about him, but it seems like he's doing the right thing. I'm very concerned with both of these guys. If I had the 101, I would just trade. I would just trade out. That's what I would do.
No, I'm right there. I mean, I feel like you have to take Brees over either one of them at the very least, and then like you said, you're probably going to take Wilson over both of them. I have probably a handful of people players I would take over them before that, but like you start getting more toward the mid or the back end of the first, and then I can start getting on board because that's when you get your upside. Like to me, going at 101, 102, especially a guy like Malik, I don't think he's going to play right away. Like I mean, maybe. So if he's not playing right away, why are you paying 101 or 102 for him? Like, oh, cool, I'll have him next year. That'll be great. Like that's gonna be so awesome. I just give me a player that's actually going to benefit me now.
Yeah, I think that's true. I just look at everything as, and I know people like to look at perceived value and all that stuff. I think Willis, based on that, will go at the 101 just because I think that people are going to like that. Now, I won't draft in there if I'm comfortable with my quarterbacks. And this is one of those things I think Debbie plays a role in. Knowing what that next class looks like and the next couple classes can help you at determining how you build your rosters. So like I have a lot of young rosters with young quarterbacks where I don't have to worry about quarterback. I'll just take best player available and I'll just keep moving or just trade back for value. So I do think that matters too, is just understanding kind of where that looks at. It's hard for me to like just jump on the Willis train. I still like Matt Corral. So I will be honest with you. Like I loved Matt Corral before it was cool, before all the big guys started talking about him last year. Like over the summer, I was a big Matt Corral fan, but the dude's got to throw at some point. And I think he was scared of the combine. That wasn't a good look. And he's got to come out and have a good thing. And I still think he can get first round draft capital too.
I do too, and I really do like Corral. He's my QB1 in the class. So I really do like Corral, and I liked what you said about the whole Debbie thing. I just joined a Debbie draft or a Debbie startup, and going into the draft, I never like make a plan. I always let the draft kind of fall to me and everything. But as I started drafting, I saw the QBs were just going wild. I'm like, I can't take QBs this early. You got Trey Lance went at 110. Justin Fields went at 203. And I'm like, all right, guys, you guys are taking the QBs. I took Jamar Chase. I took CeeDee Lamb. I started taking all these players, and I'm like, yeah, I'm feeling pretty good about my team. Now my QBs are lacking, but I knew the way that we did the startup, I had 109, and so you had the inverse for your Debbie pick for the startup, and so I knew that I was going to have 104, and I'm like, I'm basically guaranteed either Travion, Bijan, or CJ Stroud, Bryce Young, Caleb Williams, like one of those guys. And so I'm like, you know what? I think I can kind of punt QB here a little bit because I feel like the running backs are probably going to go. And then I'm sitting there and I can make the decision between Bryce Young and CJ Stroud, or maybe it'll be made for me, or even Caleb Williams or whatever. So I'm like, man, I can still have a stud QB here and still be feeling pretty good,
Yeah. And I think that's the kicker, right? And again, too, like I want everybody to know too, if people are out there using definitives, okay, if anybody's out there using definitives for this QB class, they're full of shit. They just are. Like these guys are hard to judge based on the prospects that they have and their ceiling. Yeah, I think one problem that we always have in this space, and especially with the community, sometimes we always talk about player ceilings. We're always kind of like, oh well, they're going to hit that ceiling. They're always going to hit that. No, that's just not true. Like you look at it. Now I'm a ceiling guy too when I draft. So I'll admit, like I will go after ceiling because I'm not afraid to take risks. This is why I have freaking Calvin Ridley on all my teams, which sucks now. But when you look, like I'm okay drafting ceiling and going after it. But I do think that you have to be careful with prospect talk. Like I see some takes sometimes. You're probably like that. I cringe a little bit because people are giving advice and they don't really know, like they just looked at this guy's tape a week ago and they see the tools, but they don't see the things that maybe we have seen that hey, we got to take a step back here. There's some nuance with these guys. Kyron was like that for us, Malik and these guys too. We're like, hey, you got to be very careful. Tyler Algier is another one. I'm not sure what you think of him from BYU. He was someone that's everywhere out. We're not really on because he's slow, 0-star guy that I worry about he takes a lot of hits and, he takes a lot of hits. And so these are guys that I'm saying, hey, good off. And then there was a couple big well-known guys that had Kyron and like Algier in their top 5. And then they deleted the tweets since then.
Yeah.
And it's like, you got to be careful because you're giving advice that people are going to lose money on. Like, you have to be very careful with how you kind of portray these guys. So that's why I try to be as nuanced as possible. And I just try to be as even keel. Like, I'm not going to be hot takey, which won't, people aren't going to like that too much. But it is what it is. Like, I think that I always look at it from that perspective.
No, that's great. Yeah, I'm not too high on Algier. I mean, I don't mind him, but I definitely don't have him in the top 5. And it's all later round stuff. And like with the running backs, it's so tough because I don't care if you're a film guy, if you're an analytics guy or whatever. Draft capital for running backs matters so damn much that like we can have whatever idea of a player in our heads, and then the draft happens and it completely just goes out the window. It doesn't even matter at that point. So like, I mean, I'm not saying that you shouldn't have a process and that you shouldn't care about these running backs before the draft. But I mean, it really, like you said, with Kenneth Gainwell and like all these players, it's just like you fall in love with something about them, and then the NFL's like, nah, that ain't it, dude.
I love really one guy in this draft, and that's Garrett Wilson. I like Jameson Williams, but when I look at the prospects, if I had to tie my reputation, one guy is Garrett. I really like Garrett. And then after that, it's really like just I'll take him based on value. That's kind of how I look. If as my rookie draft goes, we'll see. But if there's one guy that if I could grab every time, it would be Garrett, and that's it. That's my personal opinion on the draft. I like Breece. And I think Breece is very fine. I think he has a very safe floor. Like he's someone that I think there's not a lot of risk there. These other guys are going to have risk. Even Kenneth Walker has risk. So, to me, when I'm looking at how to draft, that's how I draft. And that's how I look at some of these prospects. And it's funny you mentioned Gainwell. I loved Gainwell. Like he could catch. They split him out wide. He did all these things. But then again, he's at Memphis. And you look at kind of who he played against. Competition. Like there's things now and you got to adapt, right? I think the biggest thing is adaptability when you look at these guys. And that's what I always do. I try to adapt my process.
No, absolutely. Toronto Dave says, I'm saving this episode so I can rewatch it later and take notes. I'm loving this so much. So appreciate that, bud. It really is crazy. But like you said, you're not the biggest fan of this class. I know you said you kind of traded away a lot or most of your picks. Are you interested in getting back into like the second round or anything like that? Because you're talking about like the value that could possibly drop, and I do think with everyone kind of having a differing opinion here this year, it's not going to be the chalky 101, 102, 103, so on and so forth. Yeah. Like everyone's taking the same guys, and I feel like there's some pretty big opportunities to get value, like in the late first, the early second, sometimes even the mid second. Like I don't know how you feel about the tight end class. But I feel like, generally speaking, tight ends are going to drop a little bit in rookie drafts, unless it's a Kyle Pitts or something like that. And I feel like you can get kind of some values with those tight ends in the second round.
Yeah, I think one of those things is if I have the 109 to like I think you had a question on this, like where would you trade for the 23 first? Like if I had the 109 to like the 112, if I could somehow flip that, I think I would. And I mentioned that like in January. So trust me, I'm not just talking out the combine. Like
sure.
I realistically looked, I figured a couple quarterbacks would jump in the top 8. You're going to have the 3 running backs, and then you have 2 wide receivers. After that, maybe 3 if you like London. And then after that, it's really kind of in there. So the opinion is, like, I think Olave is going to be one of those guys that I used to not like because I thought he was too high on people's rankings, and now he's kind of fitting in that mid-tier, right? You're looking at Olave, Sky Moore, Pickens, I think as a wide receiver kind of prospects there. In my opinion, I'm not reaching on a running back in that range. From like 110 to 208, that's going to be wide receiver tight end for me. Like, or if one of those quarterbacks like Ritter, those guys fall. Like, and you mentioned the tight end class. Jelani Woods, man, I love this kid. I talked about him during the Shrine Bowl. Like, he's a monster. Like, he is just a big kid. I'm a big fan of him. Isaiah Likely from Coastal Carolina, I think will have some run. I
Yep.
like those Greg Dulcich. I love Cole Turner from Nevada, but these are all guys you could probably get late. I think McBride's in that. Every rookie draft I've done in Superflex, McBride gets drafted from the 202 to the 208. I think that's really good value for McBride.
Yeah. Excuse me. Yeah. How do you feel about Weidemeyer?
See, Weidermeyer is one of those guys that I've always kind of talked about as like, I think he's going to be a fantastic NFL tight end. I don't know if he's going to be a good fantasy tight end. Like, he looks to
Okay.
me like if he has like, 50 catches or 40, maybe 40 catches, 40 to 50 catches, 600 yards, like 6 touchdowns, 7 touchdowns. Like, teams use him in different ways. He's not overly athletic, but he's got okay hands. I think that he can be. It depends on how teams are going to use him there. But if you're looking at the NFL and how they use these guys, I like these other guys a little bit more. Even Greg Dulcich from UCLA, like, I think that they can
Yeah.
use these guys in different ways. We'll see how Weidermeyer does. I think Weidermeyer's ceiling was in college. And I feel like what you noticed his ceiling, whatever his ceiling was, that's pretty much what you're going to get. Where these other guys, when we think
Okay.
of tight end development, I think they can get a little bit better.
Oh, that's good to know. Yeah, I know Dulcich is getting a lot of a lot of hype right now. People are, I think, like Daniel Jeremiah, Todd McShay, one of these guys, like put him as their tight end one, and everyone
Yeah,
else is freaking out about him now. So, and I mean, and like I don't want to say rightfully so because I don't have him that high. I definitely think there's a couple different tiers before I would get to him.
yeah.
But I mean, he's up there. He's not like terrible or anything. I was mad that none of the tight ends ran, or like none of the top end tight ends ran, or did too much of the combine because it would have been great to see, especially with Likely. I was really excited. I wanted to see what Likely was going to do. Because I've heard that he was likely going to burn, so I wanted to see it.
Well, it's funny about Likely. Like, a lot of people don't know. I wrote about him really early, like a couple of years ago. Like, he was like a 190-pound wide receiver when he got to Coastal Carolina, and he's basically turned himself into a tight end and just gained. Like Cole Turner, same way from Nevada. He was a wide receiver. He turned himself into a tight end. So I think that's one of those things that we're
Wow.
seeing now with wide receivers. And then hey, I can't play wide receiver, but I'll put on 20, 30 pounds and I'll go play tight end. I like those guys. I think Weidemeyer is going to struggle with his 40. I think there's a reason why he didn't run. I do think that he's going to have a low 40. So then what are we going to do with him based on his athleticism? I think that's the question.
Sure. Yeah, I feel like the tight ends don't get talked about that much, and normally I would say like rightfully so, but I feel like this tight end class is a little bit better as far as depth. Like not like obviously not everyone can get a Pitts because there's
Yeah.
one, so like you can only. But I feel like 4 or 5 guys, maybe even 6 guys, could get a pretty good tight end in this class, and feel relatively happy with themselves.
Yeah, no, I think there's value there. I think there's value at that spot. The way I look at it too is like when I'm looking at the class, like if in the second round I'm going to go either McBride, if you want to reach on another tight end, you might be able to, or a wide receiver. And in the third and fourth, unless I like one of those tight ends and where their value goes, I'm just going to look for running backs with upside that maybe could start, right? So you're looking at like a Larry Roundtree type of running back that I think can fit a role for a team out there that I can get some impact this year. And I think with the changing landscape at the running back position right now, with all of these old second tier running backs, Gus Edwards is coming back from injury, Kareem Hunt, all these other guys that I can mention, Gaskin, all those guys that are kind of like the NFL is going to want to replace those guys. You're going to find a lot of
Yeah.
value in that running back spot in the third and fourth round with guys that you think can maybe plug and play, like Zamir White from Georgia. He's a
Yep.
guy that I thought tested very well at the combine, that it made him some money because I think he's going to go day 2 now. If Zamir can find himself on a team that needs kind of that red zone guy that's going to score touchdowns, I think he has some upside in that and from that perspective.
Yeah, I was actually just about to say because I feel like he was a little bit quicker. Like he not maybe not shocked, but just kind of surprised
Yeah.
us at the combine, and so like he probably jumped up some boards when that happened, and he's definitely one. Like you said, in the third round, that's a great spot for him. And maybe some of these smaller backs. I know you're not a fan of, but
Yeah.
some of these 199-pound guys, stuff like that.
Okay, James Cook. I'll give you James Cook. I think James Cook could
Yeah,
do something. Pass catcher, explosion. If I'm going to Tyler Beatty, I like Tyler. Shit, he did in the SEC, right? I mean, he kind of lies you around you a little bit. 600 yards in the SEC. Like Keontae Ingram's a bigger guy from USC. I think he could there. Pierre Strong Jr. is a guy that I like a lot, and young kid out of South Dakota State. It'd be interesting to see where he goes. I know he's getting Elijah Mitchell comps right now based on his testing numbers, and I'm not going to go there yet. But I do think that if some of these guys can get day 2 capital, or they go to the right situation. Like, what if Pierre goes to like Miami? Miami passes on running backs, and they just say, "Hey, we're just going to use the Shanahan method," and then they get Pierre. He would be an interesting ad for me.
Absolutely. Last one. I'm not trying to pick your brain about every single player or anything like that, but Hassan Haskins. Do you have any kind of opinion on him? Because I feel like he's kind of one of like the last like bigger backs that maybe has something.
As a Michigan fan, I love Hassan. I really I like Hassan because he beat Ohio State, and anybody that beats Ohio State, you're my guy. But when I don't know, like I just ranked recently 16 guys, and I didn't have him in my top 16
Okay.
pre-draft. So I do think that he's one of those guys. He's big. He could find that like a Peyton Barber type role, right? Like old school. I don't know if people. Hey, Peyton Barber was a okay asset for a little while. Like I think
Sure.
when we're looking at that, I think it definitely could be something like that. Like, but I don't see him. I have a hard time kind of penciling him for any more of an impact than that.
He'd probably have to get lucky, or have the cards fall right and everything.
Yeah, I mean, I like him. I like him there. I just think that when you look at how many, there's so many damn running backs in here. And I will say this too, like I see this narrative all the time. Like, look how much depth at running back position. Just because there's a lot doesn't mean it's quality, right? Like, just because there's a lot of guys from COVID year and because of all this stuff that come. So, like, I think you got to be careful with in terms of like, just because there's a lot doesn't necessarily mean that there's depth. I like Hassan. Tyler Algier kind of falls. Abram Smith probably falls in that category. Brian Robinson Jr. is like 29 already. So, like, you got to be very careful with who you're drafting there based on your dynasty assets, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously we just touched on a bunch of risers and even more than that. But did anyone like truly fall for you after the combine and or just in general, like recently, somebody falling for you?
I think there's three, and I know we already mentioned a couple. I'll just talk about one. But Kyron, for sure, because of his testing numbers. Howell, because he hasn't looked good at the Senior Bowl, the Combine. So Sam Howell, inconsistent. I saw someone have him in the third round recently, and that's not good for quarterbacks. Quarterbacks got to get first-round draft capital. If they don't get first-round draft capital, then we're concerned. But Bell, I think David Bell, and I'm interested to see what you think of David Bell. I've never been a Bell guy. So I will say, like, I've always thought that he was limited that athletically. I thought his yards after catch was a little bit just because of who he was playing with. I think that his usage was high because they didn't have anybody else there. He ran out, he didn't have a great 40, right? So at 4.65, I believe is what he put in. He's already one of those guys that I thought was going to get day 2, but I mean, if he slips to day 3, now we're talking about a really big a faller for me.
Yeah, and I think that is kind of where the concern comes with Bell is that a lot of people are comping him to Tyler Johnson and saying that, it's going to be a very similar situation. Everyone, the analytics group loves him, and then all of a sudden he goes in the 5th round. I don't see that happening. I mean, they might be similar prospects. They might be analytically similar, but they're like you have a senior and a junior, one came out early. I feel like it's different enough to where I feel like he would fall to the 3rd, not to the 5th, if he does fall, and he very well could. But at the same time, he ran a 4.65, right? Like that's not the end of the world. I mean, if we're talking about 4.65 for 190-pound Kyron Williams is a big deal, then why, for this wide receiver that that doesn't really like win with his speed, then why are we worried about that 40 time? And we've seen, I feel like we've seen too many wide receivers win without running a 4.4 that it doesn't truly matter to me.
Yeah.
So, like, I feel like I would probably be higher on Bell than you, but at the same time, I've also heard a lot of, especially analytics people, be higher than on Bell than I am. So I feel like I'm kind of in between. Like, I like Bell, and I would definitely draft him. Like, probably, I'm just the way everything would fall in the draft. Probably like the beginning of the 2nd. And I would be perfectly fine with him there. Maybe even the end of the 1st if I really wanted to reach on him. But I probably wouldn't have to, especially if he goes in the 3rd or 4th round or wherever it is. So I do like me some Bell, but I think he's my wide receiver 6.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, it's not like I'm not like running out to get him either.
Yeah, he's my wide receiver 9 right now, but it really hasn't changed. Like he's been in that 3rd tier to me for like a long time. I think it just depends. But if he gets if he gets third round capital, okay. But I mean, there's people talking about him going to day 3, and then you're really concerned. I think that's the question mark where you're going to get with him. But like to me, you look at it from a perspective. Would you rather have Sky Moore or David Bell? Probably Sky right now. I mean, realistically, Sky's going up high on the like around NFL circles, and if you're looking at draft capital, I think that they're in the same tier though. Like, from my opinion, Sky Moore, Jahan Dotson, David Bell, Christian Watson should be all grouped together. Then I kind of have Olave and Pickens. They're kind of grouped in that middle tier. I like Pickens more than most. Then you have London and Burks, and for me, it's Williams and Wilson.
Yeah, I think with guys like Sky, I mean, I think Sky is being pushed up into like pick 50, 60, somewhere around there right now. I mean, and so he is getting a lot of love, but I also think that we've seen way too many misses on wide receivers getting drafted, fairly early.
Yeah.
So I really don't care about draft capital that much. It's more like thresholds when it comes for the wide receivers. Like I said, with running backs, it's a huge difference for me. Yeah. But with the wide receivers, it's more like, did you get drafted on day 1 or day 2, or whatever it is. So like if Bell's in day 3, I cannot possibly drop him below Sky Moore. I'm sorry. Like Moore's fun, but like they're not the same. Like they're not the same level of player. If you ask me, and obviously it seems like you have a different opinion. That's perfectly fine. But they're
the same tier. They're the same tier.
Yeah. I just think the small school guy. It's just I don't know. It's such a different story. I know Sky came out early as well, and people are really excited about him. I'm not saying that the Sky can't be a thing. I just feel like I would rather take. I'd rather take Bell, unless, like you said, if he drops to day 3, then that's a completely different story. But it would just be hard for me to take Sky over Bell.
I think it's one of those things, right? You run a 4.4 140 at the DAT. He had a 10'5" broad jump. I know he's 5'9". I know it, and I know all that. But Daniel Jeremiah just came out and said that he's not going to be available beyond round 2. So if that's the case, if people like that, then I don't know. What if the Saints grab him? If Jameis is there, now you have the Saints, you have an outlet. So like, I think for me too, with a lot of these guys, I just come down to where they go. Landing spots for wide receivers, I think, are important. And if they find a spot where they could be the wide receiver 2 for Josh Allen, then I'll take him over any other guy.
Yeah, I've made it like. I've made like a rule, I guess, for myself where I won't move anyone up or down a tier once I've like finalized my rankings, for landing spots and things like that. But I will move them within the tier depending on how I feel about it. So I mean, if it ends up being that Bell gets 5th round capital and he doesn't go to the greatest spot and he's buried and Sky goes to the Saints or wherever and it looks like he has a starting job, then like if they end up in the same tier, I'm perfectly fine with it. It's like it's when people are like, I really like David Bell, and then like the draft happens and he drops down, he drops like 3 tiers, and they're like, well, he's off my board. That's when I start losing my mind. I'm like, no, dude, don't do that.
I think it just depends. You know how guys are. I try to be very even keel and just say, hey, these are where my tiers are. And then I just move around in tiers. And if I'm in a rookie draft and I say, okay, if it's coming down to who based on kind of where they're at, I'll just go with the guy that I like the best.
Yeah. I was going to ask you like who your guy is, but I have a feeling that you're just going to say Garrett Wilson. Yeah,
that's all I can say. And Pickens. I will say George Pickens is a guy that I'm rooting for, but Garrett Wilson's my guy.
All right, that's interesting. So, like, I know obviously the film guys love Pickens, and I don't even, like I said, I've renounced analytics, so I don't even call myself that. But I can't like build this like amazing story for him, which I can do for other players like Jameson Williams and like Jalen Waddle and like these, and even Drake London or whoever, like these other injured players. I can build like this story and say like, but if they had played, I can't seem to do that with Pickens. I know he had some off the field issues, or maybe it was on the field, whatever it was, but I know he had some issues that maybe hindered his playing time, and obviously he had the injury as well. But what is it about Pickens? He's that good when he actually does play?
I think he's just, to me, when I was watching George, his freshman year was phenomenal when he finally got there getting in playing time. But then again, he hasn't played with a real quarterback. JT Daniels is probably the best down the field quarterback that he played with, but then JT was injured, and so he only played with 5 games his sophomore year. You got to remember, he played with, and Stetson Bennett is fine. I think he is who he is, but 5 of 7 targeted players at Georgia averaged a depth of target fewer than 10 yards. So when they were throwing the ball, they were looking for their tight end. That's why Brock Bowers right there. Burton, who was there, Jermaine Burton, who was at Georgia, he transferred to Alabama. He only had 30 targets on the team. He was the best deep threat last year while Pickens was injured. And Burton's ADOT was 14.3. He should have been getting the ball more. So I think one of the things that happens with Pickens, he just didn't have a quarterback that could utilize what he did. Now, I do know the hesitation with Pickens. He's a dumbass. He sprays water on people on the sidelines. He what else did he do? He got injured, and so you're looking at that. It looks like he came back. His route running needs refinement. There's a lot of things that I think you should be concerned about. Pickens is the biggest wild card in this draft. So if you're one of those guys that stays away from wild cards, I understand it completely. But to me, just based on his perceived, I think where his value is going to be, which is probably early second, and with his ceiling, he's so damn athletic. He was one of the most athletic dudes in high school that I saw on tape. And then he came to Georgia, and he was athletic. He looked good. He had those explosive plays. I saw someone comp him to Mike Williams. I think that's a very fair comp as a player. Like a guy that can definitely do it. 3 catches, 111 yards, and a touchdown. And then you're like, hey, where did he go for 3 weeks? So I do think that there's concern there. But I think he's valuable. I know the numbers aren't going to like him. There's a lot of film guys that don't like him based on his kind of his attitude and over there. But for whatever reason, his talent draws me to him. And it's just one of those things.
Well, yeah, I've heard so many people fall in love with Pickens, and like I said, I can generally find some reason to be like, oh yeah, I get it, and I just don't really get it with Pickens. So it's just been kind of tough. So it's good to pick your brain on that. All right, so I was gonna ask you about, you kind of already touched on like, you know, when you would trade for 23 first and everything in this class, but just kind of going into the 23 class. How do you feel about the depth of it? Just because I feel like everyone wants to talk about the excitement at the top, but then I don't know how much depth is actually there. But you're definitely a much better Devy expert than I am, so I want to pick your brain on that, because it just seems like no one actually talks about the depth of the class, and I get it. Like, there's always people that are gonna, like a Jameson Williams or somebody that's gonna come out of nowhere, and you know, even Kenny Pickett or whoever. Like, somebody's always gonna come out of nowhere, and possibly multiple somebodies. But as it is right now, how do you feel about the actual depth of the class?
So if you're looking at the depth, and I like the depth, I think you're looking at the top. We know Bijan's going to be there. We know Bryce. We know Boutte. We know JSN. You get Gibbs, who I think is going to go off in Alabama. You get Evans, Zach Evans from Ole Miss, who I like a little bit more than some do. And then you go on like Sean Tucker. What do we do with Sean Tucker? A very productive running back from Syracuse. And he looks great and with what he does. You got Tank Bigsby, who had a little bit of a down year, but I still think he can find himself in the first round of rookie drafts next year. Quentin Johnston from TCU, which I think is going to be very valuable. I think that he's going to have a very good year in that new offense that he's going to play in. Jordan Addison, Joshua Downs at wide receiver. So you're looking at guys that have that. Michael Mayer is probably a first-round talent from tight end from Notre Dame. So like when I just look at the depth, 1 through 10 is very good, and even 1 through 11 to like 202, you're looking at some very, very good players. And in what I mentioned today, I think I was talking to Joe about this, and Joe O'Leary from Dynasty Nerds, and he was saying, hey, I like the 2022 class. And I said, that's fine. You got to find analysts, because he was saying like analysts will just have blanket statements, which they are known to do, trust me. But you got to find the guys that say, where's that teardrop? So for me, if you look at that class and you're like, okay, where's the teardrop? 109 in the 2022 class is the teardrop, and you can plug in any of these guys. I would take a lot of these guys ahead of a lot of the guys in this 2022 class right now at that back end. So I think that's where you kind of look at it from that perspective. I think there's good value. I tweeted out, I combined the 2022 class and the 2023 class recently on Twitter, and I kind of went through each prospect in the first round of what I would have. And it was good. It was good for me to kind of see. I think it's good to kind of put it out there too. I know most guys wouldn't. So this is what I had combined, and you can yell at me. I had Bryce and CJ as my 101 and 102 so the 22-23 combined. Sure. I put Bijan at 103. I put JSN at the 104. I put Boutte at 105. I put Evans at the 106. I put Gibbs at the 107. And then I had Wilson, Burks, and Spiller and Hall basically in that tier. So to me, the 23 class has the 7 better players than anybody in this class. That's how I ranked them.
I would hope that Hall moved up a little bit after the combine, maybe.
Yeah, no, he would be, he would be in that. He would be close. I probably put him ahead of Evans based on the athletic numbers that he put. So if you wanted to switch those guys, that'd be totally okay. So if you put, remember this is in February. So if you wanted to put, Brees at the 106 in front of Gibbs and Wilson, those guys, or however you want to switch them. I think that's fair, and maybe I was a little lower on Brees than I should have been in that instant. But I still think that there's a lot of value to be had in that combined ranks, and like guys I didn't even put in there that I mentioned. You got. Malik, I didn't put in there because I didn't know his draft capital. Michael Mayer is going to be in there. Kenneth Walker, I didn't put in there because I didn't know how he was going to test. Tank, Quentin. So you look at those guys, I like the class. I like the 23 class. But again, everything's nuanced, right? Like you have to be very careful with like saying, oh, these guys are going to put you over the top. Everything comes with value and perceived value. So if you're looking at the 23 class and you think that they're going to be all superstars, you're full of crap. Like they're not all going to be superstars. So I think it's all about perspective. But if you get in the top 6 of the 23 class, you're happy.
No, absolutely. Yeah, I guess I was even talking about beyond that, the depth, like whereas this year, maybe it's not exciting depth, but like maybe like you said, with the COVID year and everything, it's not great depth. And so maybe it's not good, like I'm saying, but I don't know. I feel like with so much uncertainty, like I was saying before, and that, you can kind of get the values. And so maybe it's like, perceived depth. I don't know. Yeah. I don't know what I want to call it, but it's like I feel like I can still get players in the second and third round that I would want to get earlier than that because not everyone's in on those players, and so maybe like I said, it's perceived depth.
Yeah. No, I think that's true too. Like that's how we get Ayuk, right? That's how we get some of these guys like Debo. Like there's ways that we get like these guys. I think it's just about process. But there's even guys like in the 23 class. I think when we're looking at Zay Flowers from Boston College, he could shoot up boards. Blake Corum from Michigan, he could shoot up boards if you really wanted to go there. Tyler Van Dyke from Miami. You're looking at some of the guys that you could see shoot up. Raheem Jarrett from Maryland had a down year, but many thought Raheem was the wide receiver 1 heading into this year over JSN and Boutte. So now we're talking about like guys in that class that could be there. And I think that there's value everywhere. But I would say like if you can use the 23 seconds and kind of use it with a pick and get into the first round of this draft, I don't think that's a bad strategy.
Oh, I like that. And I would say you almost easily could with most people's mindsets with this class and everything. Obviously, maybe that changed a little bit after the combine, but I still feel like for the most part, you could probably trade a 23 second and possibly get into the first with just that. But even if you only have to add a little bit more, you probably could. And it wouldn't be the worst idea in the world because I really do like, at the very least, I really do like the first round of this draft. Mm-hmm. I feel like there's a lot of good players. Like I feel like everyone's gonna have that Drake London is gonna fall. Garrett Wilson's gonna fall a little bit. Then you're gonna get into the Jameson Williams. Like no one knows how to feel about him. He's injured. People are gonna say, oh, he's not gonna start year 1, and he's gonna fall. And he's your wide receiver 2 in the class, and you might be able to get him at 109, 110, something like that. And I love. I guess maybe I don't love the circumstances of why, but I do love the fact that you can get those values.
Yeah. No, for sure. No, I think there is a value there, and I think that it's just based on how you build your teams, right? Like, so I'm drafting the first round, guys. I think in 2022 class, there's some guys out there that I will take with value, and I think that you just kind of play it by ear.
So I was going to ask you about like some under the radar Devy players, but we just touched on a bunch of them, so we probably don't have to get into all that. But I did want to touch on one of them, Quentin Johnston. I feel like he's not necessarily like a household name, and yet I think I have him as my wide receiver 5 in the class. Or something right around there. I don't have it up right now. So but like I said, I don't know that he's necessarily like a household name. What is it about him that you're falling in love with?
Big kid, 6'4", 201. I think he's got a great frame. He led the receiving yards last year. He was injured. I think he's got, Sonny Dykes' new system coming in there. You're going to see a lot of usage. And I just think that he's going to have a very good year. I think he's a very good back. I mean, as a freshman, he had 22 yards per catch. And when you're looking at kind of the big play, big explosiveness that you have, I think he fits right into that. And I know we want to talk about Johnson, but his teammate, Kendre Miller from TCU, running back, you need to keep an eye on this kid. He's freaking good. 6 foot 215. He had 83 attempts last year, 623 yards and 7 touchdowns. He probably played better than Zach Evans at times last year. Both those guys from TCU are going to really go up draft boards.
That's awesome. That's great to know. I'll have to make sure I have him in the database and everything. Sometimes, sometimes I'm at like the mercy of whoever's giving me the stats, and like there will be a player. I remember last year, because I'm all analytically based or whatever you want to call it. I'm just looking at these stats, and Xavier Worthy was not in the database that I was looking at for whatever reason.
Yeah.
And like somebody was like, "Man, you're really low on Xavier Worthy, aren't you?" And I'm like, who? He's like, Xavier Worthy. And I'm looking around. I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And then finally I found his stats and I put it in. And he skyrockets up to the top, and I'm like, "Oh my god, I feel like an asshole."
and it's all about learning. That's why Debbie's hard, though, right? Like there's some things about Debbie you got to find. There's a lot of guys, so you got to just try to make sense of it all.
It's very true. Well, I appreciate you coming on here. We're right around the hour mark, and had a great time. Appreciate all your insight on all this. I know, like I said, it just everyone has a differing opinion, so it's great to hear. On this class especially, like it's great to hear why and how, and everyone can kind of pick and choose who they like and who they want to learn from and listen to and all that, and then we can have our fun drafts where everyone gets who they want.
Yep.
It could be perfect. It could be like the ideal draft for everyone. Everyone walks away happy until a month later when we start scoring points and they go, "Oh, Malik Willis is in on the field for some reason."
That's why we play, man. That's why we play. We hit guys, we miss guys, and I think it's just having a good process and knowing kind of what you do, and don't worry about the consensus. Consensus can be wrong a lot. Like, don't look at consensus, ADP. Go get your guys, and I think you just take your guys and you live with yourself.
Absolutely. You only get so many picks unless you're like that one guy that has like 19 picks. It's like, oh, how the hell did that happen? Like, how bad were you for so long to get that many picks? But thank you, Kevin, for coming on. Once again, it's Kevin Coleman at DuBois_22 from the Debbie Royale and footballguys.com. Is there anything else you'd like to plug? I know you guys have a Patreon and everything. What are you guys up to?
Yeah, if it's $3 a month, and we're doing a Patreon, but what you get is the Debbie Manifesto. We have over 100 pages of college depth charts, which is something that you don't really have out there right now. You can see where your depth charts are. We have our rankings. We also just added over, I think it was 50 rookie profiles. That's going to go out this week, probably tomorrow or the next day. Our rankings are going on there. It's very good looking. It's nice. It's presented well. It's $3 a month. So, and we will update it every month. We have a giant update. So Debbie Royale Patreon. You can find it on my profile on Twitter or just on the Patreon. We really appreciate it. We're almost up to 50 patrons in 2 weeks, so we really appreciate the support.
That's awesome. Yeah, definitely check them out. Obviously, you can tell Kevin knows his stuff. I promise you, like, half of the stuff I talked to him about today was not on the show sheet. I didn't warn him about any of it. I didn't talk to him about Quentin Johnston or any of these players, and it's just right off the top of the head. So the dude knows his stuff, and definitely check out their pod, check out their Patreon, and check out Kevin. Just not if his wife is around, but. We're going to go ahead and cash out. I appreciate you guys listening. Appreciate you, Kevin. But we will see you guys next time.